Good morning, everyone. You're all very welcome to this week's webinar, Farm Business Options webinar from Teagasc. My name is Rachel Taylor and I'm primarily a dry stock advisor in County Kildare based in the Teagasc Naas office, but I'm also the options coordinator for the county. The name of this week's webinar is The Farm, Feeding the Mind and Body. Some of you may have been on the webinar on the 24th of November. If you weren't, you can find a link to it on the Teagasc website. But in that webinar, Bernard Dooley focused on wellness and the topic of mental health. His speaker spoke of how important connecting with nature is and just taking time to engage with your senses to appreciate what's around you and take solace from that to improve both mental and physical health. In the era we live, life has become quite fast-paced and technology-focused. Life throws us many curveballs, this year being a good example, but also smaller, more individually impacting issues, and this can have a negative effect on our health and well-being. Sometimes we just need to stop, recenter ourselves, and look at the bigger picture to refocus. When it seems like everything is out of control, focusing on the smaller elements of day-to-day life that we can control, such as going for a walk or taking time to note what we eat, can help us improve and strengthen our mental and physical health. So keeping this in mind, in today's webinar, we have three speakers. Firstly, Stephen Morrison from Kill in County Kildare is going to talk about his new business venture, coupling his love with biodiversity on the farm and nature with his wife's training in psychotherapy and interest in art to develop a creative wellness center called So Earth Studios. Also, as we know, mental and physical health are linked to us consuming fresh produce, and that can help improve our mental health. So James Fennell of Burtown House in Athy is going to talk about his business, which started as a restaurant using homegrown produce, but has diversified many times now since first opening. And finally, many new farm diversification projects require help and funding to get them off the ground. So Helen Mulhall from Leader is going to talk about technical and financial support that is available for people either thinking of newly diversifying their farms or further developing an existing business. Before we start though, I'd just like to remind you all that if you have any questions throughout today's webinar, that you can leave a question down in the chat box at the bottom of the screens, and we'll get through as many as possible before the end of the webinar. So to start, our first speaker today is Stephen Morrison. Stephen and his wife Heidi have 4 children and primarily operate a dry stock farm. They're in the process of opening a wellness centre on the farm. So Stephen, I'll pass it over to you and you can expand a little bit more on what you've done so far.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rachel. I'll just start by giving a little bit of a background to our situation here. The farm is situated in North Kildare, near the village of Kill. So we're about 20 minutes from Newlands Cross and about 10 minutes from Naas. As Rachel was saying, I'm a dry stock farmer. I'm calving down about 70 cows, both in the spring and the autumn. And if you go back about 5 years, my plan was to just grow the farm to about 100 cows, and I was lambing about 200 sheep. And I guess at one point we decided, where is the farm going? Because we seem to be going around in circles and not really making a whole lot of progress financially. And I suppose things came to a head when I developed a back injury. So we really had to start thinking about the future. A couple of things that made us focus was, what are the strengths of the farm? So one of the main strengths we discovered was our location. As I was saying, we're very close to Dublin, close to Naas, and close to a large population centre. Also, the farm has a lot of pretty unique features on it. So biodiversity-wise, we have a lot of old trees, mature trees. There's a fen in the centre of the farm. There's a river. There's an old mill. So that was the strength from the farmer's point of view. And then we looked at our own strengths. So my wife, as Rachel was saying, she's a fine artist, and she's also art psychotherapist. So she's got the creative side. I had a big interest in biodiversity. So we decided, well, why not try and combine those two and come up with a new business? So that's what our thought process was. This actually, as I say, started about 5 years ago. So we started talking to each other about our different ideas, and then we included our immediate family. My kids are all starting to university at the moment. So we had an idea what kind of path they were going to take in the future career-wise. So went from talking to our immediate family to the extended family, and just writing things down on paper and trying to get our heads in the right direction. So I made contact with Leader in Naas. There was a chap there a few years ago that was very helpful called Brian. He came down to the farm. We just roughly talked about our idea. He said, yeah, he reckoned that would kind of fit in with the Leader idea of what they would perhaps fund. So we took it from there. So the next idea was to engage a planning consultant. Got the planning consultant involved, went for planning, and this is where the whole thing became a bit of an eye-opener to me. So we had to do an archaeological dig, archaeological report. Eventually we got planning on the second time round, and from then on we had to get a quantity surveyor to give us an estimate of the cost of the new build. And when we did that, we went back to Leader with all that information, and they said, yeah, okay, that's good. So we took it to the next phase, where we sat down again and we drew up a very detailed business plan of how the business is going to run. So I suppose for me at the very start, it is quite a long process when you're thinking about changing a farm and coming up with a new idea. I kind of liken a farm a little bit to an oil tanker. You're going in one direction, and to change direction takes, you don't do it overnight. It takes a lot of planning, and you know, you can do it eventually, but you got to give a lot of thought process to it. And for me, one of the benefits of getting Leader involved, apart from the finance, was it makes you really concentrate your mind, because you got to come up with a good business plan. You can have all your costings done, and then you present it to Leader and see what they think of it. Leader also give you a lot of backup. So during the process, we would have gone to talks that were hosted by Leader that helped you draw up a business plan. They explain to you what they're looking for in it, and also the whole idea of procurement, which is a big deal with when you're going down the Leader route. And so yeah, they give you a lot of help. So yeah, that was the background to the project. The project itself is an eco wellness retreat, and it's also a creative arts therapy center. So we're trying to plan a building that was going to be multifunctional. So one of the groups we're hoping to get involved in the new build would have been businesses out of Dublin. So they would come down for the day. We would start the day by bringing them for a walk around the farm. Depending on the time of year, we would explore the flora and fauna in the hedgerows. We would look at native forestry. We would talk about the wildlife that are living there. And we would just get our heads in a completely different space. So you're going from the city to the countryside. And then we would go back to the building, and it could be a program of ceramics. So we're going to put in a kiln, or you could go down the art route. So the whole idea is to get these corporates who are living really busy lives in Dublin, very hectic, get them down, get them to relax, and get them to experience nature. So that would have been one idea for the use of the building. We also have smaller rooms in the building. We're using them for the arts psychotherapy. So creative arts therapists, so it would be art therapists, drama therapists, music therapists. They're all going to use this space for both adults and children. We've designed the building so it has these huge big windows looking out on the garden. It was an old orchard, and there's a barn wall that you can see, which is 500 years old. So the idea is when you come down here, immediately you're immersed in nature. So you're actually in the building, but you almost feel like you're sitting in the garden. That's what we are hoping to achieve. And in doing that, around the farm, we planted 20 acres of native forestry last winter. We put in wild bird cover, and actually next to the building, we put in a forest garden. There's an acre forest garden went in last year. So we've been busy planting trees all last winter. The process of working with Leader, it's complicated, and you really have to get your head into the right mindset when you're working with Leader, because there's a lot of rules and regulations that you have to adhere to, and they're there for a good reason, and you just have to work with Leader rather than against them. So what I would say to anybody getting involved, drawing down funds from Leader, is really go through what you need to do. So, for example, when we were doing the procurement exercise, it's very, very important that you adhere to their dates. So we had to tender the whole project in a local newspaper, and that was 21 days. You had to try and get your 5 tenders in, and on the 21st day, I had to finish at midnight. So that midnight is midnight. You cannot move that time. So things like that, you really have to be on the ball. And when I was talking to builders, more prospective builders, about doing the project, I was upfront with them. I said, this is a Leader project, so you will need to have all your insurance in place, your tax clearance certificates, proper invoices, and a very thorough breakdown of costs. So I didn't want any messers getting involved, and if they weren't prepared to do that, I didn't even want them to tender for the project. So immediately you're weeding out people that wouldn't be suitable. So eventually we ended up with a really good builder, and it's gone well. We've had 5 drawdowns of money. We're on the 5th phase now, and each time you draw down money from Leader, you have to say furnish insurance details of yourself, your architect, your builder. You've got to get tax clearance certificates. You've got to get full invoices. You've got to give bank details of the money leaving your bank account, and then when you get drawdown funds from Leader, you got to show details of it going into your bank account. So that's another thing I would say. If you're going to go down the Leader route, you have to be prepared to be very open with them about all your financial details. You got to give them access to your bank accounts. So if you're prepared to do that, that's good. If you don't want to do that, then that's going to be a problem. So yeah, we've almost at the end of the project now. We're just doing the snag list. It's gone well. Without Leader, we wouldn't have been able to do the project. And I suppose another thing at the start, when we were organising the funds for the project, I was going to the bank to organise a mortgage, and the bank were saying, well, we need to see the Leader grant. And then I was going to Leader, and they were saying, well, we need to see the bank mortgage. So there's a few times I felt a little bit like the piggy in the middle, but we got there eventually. And yeah, so really delighted now that we've got to where we are.
Thanks for that, Stephen. I know the project is still in its early phases, but I think you have given us a lot of information there. Just to remind you that the chat function is open at the bottom if you have questions, and we will go through those questions at the end, so keep them coming in. But now I'll just keep things moving. I'll move on to our next speaker, who is James Fennell from Burtown House in Athy. James and his wife Jo live in Burtown House, a house steeped in history, passed from generation to generation. Much hard work and time has gone into setting up a restaurant, producing the food from the accompanying farm, as well as running events and wedding venue, and to most recently providing accommodation on the farm. So James, I'm sure I've forgotten something, but I'll pass it over to you and you can fill in the blanks about the business.
Thank you, Rachel. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're perfect. Yeah.
Great. Well, I suppose just to give you a bit of a, to go back in history a little bit, we live at Burtown House, and it's one of two houses in Kildare that has not been sold from the 18th century. So yeah, it's steeped in history. It's an old Quaker house. We're an old Quaker family. It's beside the village of Ballytour, which is an old Quaker village. So when I grew up, I was we had a kind of a bigger farm. My dad got hit with death duties very, very badly when he was 21. He finished paying them off 3 years before he died. That's when he was about 63. So we were kind of crucified with debt for the whole of my upbringing, and I kind of witnessed everything kind of falling down. The buildings became deteriorated, the yards kind of crashed into the ground, and there seemed to be bad harvest after bad harvest. So I wanted to do something different. I didn't want to spend my life flogging a dead horse, which is what it would have felt like. So, but by that time, almost 3/4 of the farm had to be sold to try and pay off some of the death duties. And that was about when I was 22 years old. So I'm a photographer. I've been traveling around the world for about 25 years, photographing lots of books. I shoot interiors mainly. I've also done a number of books called Vanishing Ireland, which some of you guys might be familiar with, which is photographing rural art, people in rural Ireland and towns as well, I suppose. But so I was, you know, I spent a lot of time thinking about what I wanted to do, and obviously agritourism seemed the right move for everything that we have at Burtown. We have extensive gardens that we've been developing for about 30 years. When my mum moved there, any gardens that had existed were completely covered in ivy. There were meadows up to the house. You couldn't even get to the apple trees. There were so many brambles. Everything was nettles, brambles, sycamore saplings, etc. So during it, since I could wield a slasher, I'd been kind of trying to slowly take back things. And when I was a photographer overseas a lot, I was putting any money I was making into slowly restoring things, starting with walls of the kitchen garden and the stable yard. We then started working on. I got married. I moved back to Burtown with my wife Joanna, and we renovated some of the stable yard, and we lived there. And we just started working our way from the bottom of what remains of the farm up towards the house, which is the kind of angle I took. So in 2012, we then opened the gardens to the public. That was the start. And we decided, well, if we're going to open the gardens, we need to have a little coffee shop or restaurant. But it was at that point that we decided that we would only use produce that we grow, seasonal produce. The coffee shop suddenly became really popular. It was more like a cafe. It became a restaurant. We'd sometimes like have 150 people there for lunch, and it became really booked out and very busy, but it was seasonal, and it was at the edge of the house, and it became intrusive at that point. I had young kids. So when I was away shooting a book in Sri Lanka, we came up with the idea that we'd do something much bigger so that we could eventually be able to step away a little bit rather than to have to be actively there all the time. And that is what we know now as the Green Barn, which is our big farm to fork restaurant, which faces the edge of our kitchen garden, which is where we grow all the produce. So we stuck with that very, very strict rule in that we would only ever use seasonal produce, almost always, that we grow. I'm very lucky that I got introduced to a grower called Dermot Carey, who's been involved with this project since we started building the Green Barn in 2016. So 2012, we opened the gardens. 4 years later, we have the Green Barn. And around just a little bit after that, we started doing accommodation. The accommodation is a little bit different from regular accommodation. We've spent a lot of time doing the interiors. It's full of very nice furniture that we've picked up, we've built. We make all our beds. So we have a carpenter. So we're trying to be, I suppose, a bit like how an estate would have run years ago. We make all the furniture, we grow all the food. We now have our Dexter cows. Hopefully we're going to grow mushrooms soon. Whether we start making cheese, I'm not sure. But that's the idea, is that everything is being produced on the property, and we're employing as many people in the locality as possible. That's a big, important part of what we're doing. So we now employ about 22 people. And it's a big, massive engine that requires a huge amount of time and a lot of attention to detail, because you can very quickly go down rather than up when you have a restaurant. There's a lot of money tied up in staff costs. So you have to be very on it. It's been a lot of work, but I'm looking at it as a way that I can sustain the future of what remains of what we have, because that's not going to happen with farming. I knew that very early on. We'd never do that with farming. So yeah, I think that if something were to happen to me, to survive with somebody else running it, whereas before, me being a photographer, I was away and I was putting all my money into propping the place up, and then I realized that if something were to happen to me, sure, it would all be sold pretty quickly anyway, because it needed to be propped up somehow. So by doing this, we're sustaining the future of the whole place. We have about 160 acres left, so we're trying to think smartly about what we're going to do with it. We're going to put a lot more forestry in. We're going to create walks. So we're taking a 40-acre field quite soon, and we're going to put in a big deciduous forest. Obviously, which will take a long time to grow, but it's going to be something for the future. We're going to start doing more accommodation in a big wildflower meadow that we've created. The idea is with the rest of the farm that it's going to be a bit like a nature reserve. We're going to basically wild it is the plan. We're lucky that we have various water courses on the land. So the idea is to make it a place for people to come and enjoy, eat good food. We also have a sculpture park, so view art, look at gardens, be immersed in nature, eat really good food, and to be able to stay there as well, and to experience everything that we're trying to, what we're living in, I suppose, is the idea, to be able to share it. Country houses were built to accommodate lots of people. So that's kind of where I am with Burtown and what we've been doing.
That's great, James. No, thanks for giving us that synopsis, a brief synopsis of what you've achieved in a lifetime. I see there's questions coming in there, so keep them coming. Our final speaker today, though, is Helen Mulhall from Leader, and she's here to talk through the process of applying for a Leader grant, and also the other services that Leader provide to help people in setting up a new business. And actually, Helen, one of the questions that's just coming in before you start is about getting help with doing the business plan and whether Leader provide that or who provides that service. So you might be able to expand on that one as well. So I'll pass it over to Helen. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. So good morning, everyone. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Leader generally. I'll just share my screen so you can see the presentation. Okay, so we'll start with just kind of an overview of the programme and some of the main pointers to note. So just for County Kildare, we have a team made up of 6 people, and there are different roles. So we have our manager, finance coordinator and administrator, and then along the bottom we have the 3 development officers. So they're the people that you would meet to discuss your project and help to prepare your application. Now, broadly speaking, we cover 3 areas, which will be common throughout Ireland. So we have community and social enterprise, which Brian mainly looks after. I do a lot of farm diversification, tourism and enterprise. And then Maeve looks after the environmental projects, which are water resources, biodiversity and renewable energy. So just in terms of farm diversification, I pulled out a section from our guidebook. Where Leader comes in is the areas beyond the department areas in agricultural production. So rural tourism, whether that's accommodation or ecotourism, activity and adventure, equine, like riding schools, farm shops, arts and food or beverages, so it's kind of small quantities of high quality produce, the creative industry and renewable energy business. So that's what comes in under farm diversification, just as an overview of what we're talking about. And just people often ask me 3 questions at Leader. What do you fund? How much can I get? And how do I get it? And there's just kind of the nuts and bolts of it. So the minimum grant aid that we give in Kildare is 5,000. Now, other areas might give smaller grants down to about 1,250. And the maximum is 200,000, subject to the budget available at any time. And the rate of aid for enterprise projects that farm diversification would come in under is 50%. So the types of things we can fund would be capital support. So that could be construction or fit out costs or equipment, marketing costs. Analysis and development is research. So for example, a feasibility study into a new venture, and training. Now I'll talk a little bit about some of the training projects that we're doing. It's unusual for somebody to come to us for a training program on their own. It's something that we generally do as an in-house project ourselves and invite people to take part in. On our website, you'll find a brief guide to Leader. And again, while it's done for Kildare, a lot of the information there is common to any area. So if you're looking for your own area, the ILDN website, ildn.ie, has a map of Ireland, and you can just zone into your area and click to see where your local development company is and find their contact details. But in terms of general advice, to know what's eligible or not eligible, you can see on page 5. So generally it's the operating costs are not eligible. So things like rent, insurance costs, salaries, working capital, Leader doesn't fund those operating costs. It's more about the once-off. Something called a durability clause is that whatever is funded by Leader should still be in operation 5 years after you draw down your grant aid. So an example of something that's not durable, another officer in another county told me that they had funded some drones off the west coast of Ireland. They started to disappear then when they were out in windy weather, and they were running into trouble then when an auditor would come around because there was no drone to be found. So something that's going to stand the test of time for 5 years plus is suitable for Leader. Again, the different rates of aid are included. So the 50% is for capital expenses. There are slightly higher rates of aid for community projects or for feasibility studies. And again, your maximum minimum budget is there. One thing that we've tried to really highlight in this programme is that there's a cross-cutting theme across Leader. So whether it's an enterprise project or a community project, we're really trying to encourage people to think about the climate change impacts of your project. So if it's something that you're doing in construction, it's really to talk to your architect or engineer about how you're minimising your carbon footprint in that. So every new venture is going to have some impact on the environment, even if it's minimal. And what we would advise people to do is to think about their mitigating measures. So if you're doing construction, are you using environmentally friendly materials? Are you using energy efficient building standards? And to highlight what you're doing, whether it's solar panels or efficient heating that doesn't involve oil, and just to build that into your procurement. So when you're doing up your specification, that you put in those measures and then you're evidencing how you're meeting those guidelines. So that guidebook there again is done for all types of projects, and it's just worth talking about at the early stages. So generally the process follows these steps no matter where you go to in Ireland. The first step of getting in contact with your local development company is to fill out an expression of interest form. So even if you pick up the phone for a chat and you're not sure what you're going to do, I'd advise filling out an expression of interest form. It's really very basic. It's your contact details, what your project is in terms of the concept of it, what you'd like to spend the money on, and a broad indication of how much you think it'll be, and whether you've got planning permission or where you're at with that. But the main thing for me is actually that it gives me an idea of who's planning what in the area. And it also gives me, from a data protection point of view, it gives me a database of people I can contact. So even if we're running some kind of support program, and I know somebody's interested in, say, setting up an ice cream business, I might know of some training event happening that they could be involved in. And it just gives me their contact details. It also gives us a chance to budget going forward, knowing where the demand is. So that's a really useful tool on both sides, just to kind of get your name in there with Leader and that you have a contact with them. If you're going forward with an application, you'll be working very closely with your development officer around the things that Stephen talked about. Your procurement is very detailed, and we've actually started doing something now, which is linking people in with a procurement expert. So while your engineer, your architect, if you're doing a construction project, will be doing your detailed technical drawings, and you might be getting a bill of quantities, just around the advertising and the dates and deadlines and the wording of your documents, we've just found it helpful to bring that expertise in, and we do that at our own cost from our own funds, just to help people get through that process, because it's something that can trip us all up in the applications, and it's just to get that process as smooth as possible. We found that helpful. I know many of the development officers around the country have either done specialist procurement training themselves, or they have someone on standby to give advice on that as well. So then once the application comes in, we do our assessment report, and we send it forward for an administrative check with the local authority. Then it's presented to an independent evaluation committee, and this is a committee of volunteers from various sectors and levels of expertise around the county who will assess the project and see if they recommend it to go forward for grant aid. If they recommend it, it goes to your local community development committee and they make the final decision. In our case, that's Kildare LCDC. They will then issue your grant agreement, which will be signed, and then you start your project at that stage. So I suppose the main point is not to start your project or spend any money until you have that agreement signed and sealed. Once your project is completed, you'll be making the payments to your suppliers. That can be done in stages or in once-off, depending on your cash flow. And you can do up to 5-stage payments, which is helpful for your cash flow in larger projects like Stephen outlined. You submit your claim and then the funds are drawn down. So there is an important process there around managing your cash flow through that process as well. The programme so far has been on a first come, first served basis. We're now at a stage where we're coming to the end of the formal programme term in 2020, and we're awaiting an announcement from the department about extending the programme, and after that then a transition programme. So most of the counties around will have a small amount of budget left, if any. In our case, we have some projects going to a meeting tomorrow. If they're all approved, we might have about 200,000 left for Kildare to allocate in the early part of 2020, and we'd like an extension just to get a couple of projects through on that. We've about 96% of our budget is fully allocated now at this point, and we're linked to CAP, so we're I suppose hopeful that we'll get an announcement very soon about the future of the programme. But for us, it's pretty much business as usual. We still want to hear expressions of interest coming in and talk to people with a project in mind, so that we know what they're planning and we can start to support them. There'll be some questions at the end, which I'll maybe revert to Rachel for those. But in the meantime, I suppose I just want to mention, aside from giving grants, Leader is a development programme, what other supports you can get. So one of the things we've been doing in recent years is working jointly with the local enterprise office here in Kildare, and we have a sort of a protocol with them. So if they come across an agricultural project or farm-based project they feel is not eligible for Leader or for Leo funding, they'll refer them to us. And I would always say to people that while you can only get your grant from one agency, that doesn't mean you can't get supports from both. So people coming to the local enterprise office should be looking to ask them about their one-to-one business clinics, their mentoring services, and their start your own business programs or other specialist training programs. From a Leader point of view, we have run business plan workshops, but they're mostly about preparing your business plan for a Leader application and ticking all the boxes that Leader wants. It's not necessarily as holistic as the Leo in terms of business advice. So I'm a specialist in advising people on how to get a Leader grant, but I'm not necessarily a specialist in how to make your business viable. So I like to see people getting the best of both worlds, where they would go to Leo for their general business advice. They might get some specific mentoring on marketing or finance, and then they would come to me and saying, right, how do I send out these quotes, or how do I make sure I fill out my grant application properly? And I'll go through all their drafts and check those for them. If I see something in their cash flow, for example, or in their accounts that's really alarming, to say you're going to run into major debt in month 6 and you haven't planned for that, then I certainly flag it to them. But usually by the time people come to us, they have a lot of that research done and they're really just trying to get their application finalised. So I just want to flag that some of the Leo supports would be, I know in Kildare, for example, you can get a grant for your website for about £2,500, kind of a voucher system. It's usually more effective to go to them for that than to come to Leader for a grant for that, because their system's a little bit more straightforward. But for the larger capital expenses, you may be coming to Leader. So the grant aid is the thing that we have in common, but all our other supports are quite different. In Kildare, for example, we've joined forces with the local enterprise office to run 2 training programs for entrepreneurs so far. One is craft network training, and the one which is starting in January is food network training. So between us, we've gone through our databases and we've advertised. So anybody in the food business, whether they're a producer, restaurant, or a supplier, we've gone out with a program of how to develop a common marketing brand for food in Kildare. And it might be putting together actions such as a common website or a schedule of food events for the county. So it's really just to look at elevating the status of food branding in County Kildare. We did something similar for our craft network, and you might have seen the website or the Instagram account for Original Kildare. And again, it's a network of producers coming together to make themselves heard in a noisy market. Another project that we're working on at the moment is to support people around developing businesses along the Barrow Blue Way. So the Barrow line is a line of the canal that runs from the north of the county in Robertstown down to Athy, and it cuts through part of Laois as well. And we're doing a strategic plan for the economic development of the Blue Way, and including people who might be looking at developing enterprises along the route to help out with the market research on a strategic level. So from time to time, you'll find that the leader company are doing those type of broader development projects that you can become involved in. And we'd hope to have a network of suppliers built out of that where people can help each other to market and cross-refer customers to their businesses as well. I suppose there are a few tips in terms of leader that I would advise people. So definitely to engage early through the expression of interest. It's a short form, it'll take you 5 minutes to fill out, and you won't be held to the amount of the specific detail in it. It's a good way of engaging. The second thing, I suppose, is just around procurement. I think it's the people's least favourite part of the process, and definitely getting that specialist help has been beneficial for us in Kildare. Some of the things I've noticed about what do the projects that go through easily have in common, I would say a good technical specification. So you'll have your drawings for planning permission, but for procurement, you're really looking at your detailed construction drawings with good level of finishes and measurements itemised on it. And if at all possible, a bill of quantities, because that way you're ruling out kind of grey areas in the pricing. And when the prices come back in, it's really important to be able to compare like with like. And I would fully echo what Stephen says about talking to your builders. Now, you don't necessarily, there's pros and cons to letting them know that it's leader granted. On one hand, sometimes people see that as an invitation to add a little bit onto the price. But on the other hand, I suppose they know that the deadline is the deadline. And I had a really unfortunate situation recently where not all the builders returned the signed forms, and the promoter has to go out and do the procurement again, which is really disheartening for them because they've put in all the work and they've done everything correctly, and it's just, I suppose, from the builders' end, they didn't send everything back. So it's definitely worth talking to your builders and lining up who you think is going to quote for it, and making sure that you would be happy to go with any of those 5. So there's a lot of homework to be done in just engaging with your suppliers as well. So there really, I suppose, the pointers. One of the things we found helpful in Kildare as well, based on the experience of Stephen and others, is we held some briefing meetings with representatives of the main banks, Bank of Ireland and AIB, to talk to them about how Leader works, and encouraging them to refer people to us if they felt they had a project that might be eligible, and also to explain to them the stages of the grant process so that we could get a bit of a protocol going about, I suppose, that over and back between getting the grant aid and getting your letter of grant approval, to explain to them what we're looking for at what stage, and just to make that a little more smooth. So I suppose we're constantly looking at how to make the process a little bit more approachable for people, and how to get through those kind of potential blockages. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to hear from people at this stage, Rachel.
Thanks for that, Helen. You've given us loads of information there, a lot to take in. I'm sure the questions will be coming in as we go along through these ones. But if all the panelists just would like to turn their cameras back on, and I'll just work down through the questions that have been coming in. So Stephen, you're in the hot seat first. So we have a question here. Someone would like to know if there's any advice you would give on dealing with the planning authorities when developing a project. I suppose, would you recommend the pre-planning application meeting, or how did you go about it, and is there anything you'd change in the way you did it?
Yeah, well, the first thing I did, Rachel, was I got myself a planning consultant. I talked to him about the project I had in mind. We walked the site, and we had a pre-planning meeting as well, that was very helpful, yeah, with County Kildare. And then we went to planning, and they came back and wanted us to do an archaeological report. So that just involved, it was actually quite straightforward in the end. Do a dig. I have an old JCB in the farm, so the archaeologists came out for a day. It was a very cold day in January. Both of us were freezing by the end of it, but I dug, he watched to see if I dug up anything up, and then he wrote a report. It cost me €1,000, but it had to be done. And then we got planning after that.
And are there any archaeological features in your area that would have triggered that they looked for that, or they just?
Yeah, exactly. Our farmyard is actually, it's an old, what they call an old barnyard. So in the center of the farmyard is a castle, and where we were building would be within, I think it's 400 meters of that. So that's why that triggered the archaeological dig, yeah.
Okay. Another question that just came in for you there. Did you involve a solicitor in the drawing up of legal agreements along the process?
Yeah, for me, I had to get a solicitor involved when I was getting the mortgage from the bank. And I didn't want to give the bank the whole farm as collateral on the mortgage. So then we had to divide up part of the farm, and I had to go and get ordnance survey maps and get the solicitor involved in that. And also when you draw down a mortgage from the bank, you have to pay for their solicitor as well. So that's just another one to pay for.
You get hit twice.
Yeah.
Well, Gerald is just asking here, how did you go with planting an acre of garden forest? Was there much hassle with planting the 20 acres of native forest?
Native forestry, that was straightforward enough. I engaged a company called Greenbelt. We put in the application for our forestation. Again, we actually had to have an archaeologist on site when we were doing the planting, and also when we were doing the mounding. But no, that was straightforward enough. And the 1 acre forest garden, myself and my family, we just planted that last winter ourselves.
How did COVID affect you? So your business isn't quite up and running yet, but this might be something that James might come in on as well. With COVID and it taking an effect on many of the businesses this year, how did you adapt or rearrange the way you had things planned out? So I suppose for you in the building phase, were you put on hold, or how did you manage with COVID this year?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because we're actually just going through the snag list with the builders, and my builder has just come down with COVID. So also it delayed the building because we had to stop last March, April, and a bit of May. So that delayed the whole process a little bit as well. And in terms of running the new business, obviously groups are out for at least the next 6 months. So the one-to-one therapy, that can go ahead. That's actually already started. And we're thinking of perhaps temporarily using the bigger space in the building as hot desks. So that would people that are working from home, that are getting fed up working in their bedrooms or their kitchen table, they can come down here, rent a desk for half a day, and work in a really, really nice atmosphere. And then we just get rid of the desks at the weekend and use the building for other events at the weekend.
Yeah, so that's, you've kind of seen an opportunity there, or where there is a gap in the market and you're taking advantage of it. James, I don't know if you can hear me there or not. COVID obviously affected the restaurant trade and everything this year, but how has your business adapted to it, and have it made you find any other ways around doing things differently, or?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so yeah, of course you're having to adapt the whole time. It's very, very challenging. Again, you know, the potential to lose lots of money very quickly with food operations. So we're lucky though that we don't have rents and all the sort of things that restaurants might have, whether in towns. So we're a little bit easier in a way. People have been saying to us, so our restaurant was built for COVID because it's big, it's in the countryside, it's airy, and we have tons of outdoor spaces. But we did make some alterations in creating another terrace. We bought a tent. We did created way more outdoor areas. To be honest with you, we're having to adapt the whole time. Every time something different happens, you can seat less people. Yeah, you have to be really honest. So it's been very, very difficult. But we were lucky in the Kildare lockdown, for instance. Everybody was coming to us because we were such a big space and it was sunny days. So we were just very lucky, I think.
Yeah, you could, especially with the summertime and everything, you could manage outside a bit better.
Yeah, I mean, we were doing things like, for instance, during the first lockdown, we did takeaway to tables in the parkland. So we put all our tables out into the long grasses where we have the sculpture park at the front of the house. And so we were essentially doing takeaway service to the gardens. So which was fine and it was safe and everybody was very happy with the setup. But yeah, you have to, when you're employing lots of people like that, it's very difficult. Yeah, it's been stressful.
Yes, I can imagine. And another question that's come in there, marketing. Your business is quite diverse at this stage, and I know you run events in the evening time and things like that. What's your marketing strategies or any top tips on marketing? Are you very reliant on repeat business or is it new business, and how do you get your name out there and keep the name out there?
Well, at the start, when we opened the Green Barn, we worked with a PR company in Dublin called Host, and they were great because they got us perhaps maybe too much exposure at the start. So we were super, super busy, and it was pretty overwhelming, to be honest with you, because the engine wasn't running tightly or smoothly, I suppose, because it was new business. So, but to be honest with you, the main thing we use is social media, Instagram. As I'm a photographer, it's an obvious one for us. And so we have a large following on Instagram, and that's how you get the message out there most quickly and the cheapest by far. We've tried everything from doing print to God, what else? Yeah, taking out advertisements to getting editorial to advertorial. Nothing works like social media. Social media is the best. It's the cheapest. If you can create good posts, good feed, it's brilliant. It's amazing. You can get that. As I say, there's no other way of penetrating so many people so quickly. As a touch of a button on your phone.
Yeah,
to get that exposure in the papers or in articles is way more difficult.
The era we live in at the moment, technology focused, definitely.
It really is, and because we're all about the visuals, the aesthetics. Obviously, to present that through photos is a great way to be able to do it, But so we don't really have a big marketing budget every year. In fact, we don't really. We just kind of occasionally we do paid posts, but we do even less of that now. So our marketing budget has gone down. We may consider using Host and Co again in a company to with some new elements of the business that we're going to be doing over the next while. But otherwise, yeah, that's what we do.
And Stephen, for you, for a new business that's trying to get your name out there, how have you gone about marketing? Are you using a company, or is it through contacts that you have with people, or what's your strategy?
Yeah, well, I suppose before we even had a digger on site, I was talking to a few companies that were already involved in the farm, because we've been doing farm walks, and Heidi had been doing art on the farm and art weekends here. So I had got expressions of interest from them. And then as the build took shape, we've had an Instagram account. We've been putting up photographs of the building as it took shape, photographs from around the farm, the walking trails, trees as they get planted, just to create a bit of interest there. Facebook, and we have a website that should be up and running there the first week in January. So that's
so very good. A lot of it is self-driven, and you've got your name out there. But Helen, for people starting out, do you put them in contact with marketing agencies, or kind of direct them where to go with marketing, or what help is out there with that?
No, I suppose the leader funding in terms of marketing it's around, I suppose my main questions for people is, what do you need the money for? Where would you spend it? So that's kind of how we tend to focus. Whereas if you go to the local enterprise office, they would put you in touch with a marketing mentor and maybe work out a marketing plan for you. So for example, if you wanted to spend if you wanted to spend money on marketing, somebody asked about a startup food business. So a cost there could be in initial stages really, I suppose, developing your brand identity, the style of packaging, your logo and graphics. If you wanted to invest something in that at the start, that could be something that could be an eligible leader cost, just to really get that, I suppose, brand identity out there, and maybe to put together some initial content that you could schedule to go out, whether that's professional food photography or something that you really wanted to invest in at the start. But people would really need to, I suppose, research who they want to work with. And I suppose I might just move on to the question about a food enterprise. Will I just give examples?
Yeah, just very quickly.
What leader could fund. So outside of the marketing, if you're really in the early stages and wanted to do something really new, you could look for funding for a feasibility study. But more than likely for a food business, it would be, if you already have a premises, it would be equipment. And equipment is actually quite straightforward from a leader perspective for funding. You don't need planning permission for it, this kind of stuff. It's pretty straightforward, and it's if you're looking at specialist equipment, it's usually you're dealing with one supplier, you're just getting it installed, and we come and check the serial number and you get paid. That can be quite a straightforward one. Equipment is a good fit for leader in terms of making the process a little bit easier. You could also look at, for example, if you wanted to use an outbuilding from the farm, you could be building in a customized refrigeration unit if it was a food business, and again, that would be eligible for leader funding as well. So yeah, I suppose they're the types of supports could be marketing or could be capital generally with a food business.
Perfect. Just very quickly to get through some more of these questions, we only have 10 minutes left, but for Stephen first, I'll just say issues on insurance. Have you got that far yet? Where did you go for insurance? Was there many out there on the market?
Yeah, well, during the whole process, I had to show leader my farm liability insurance. I already had that in place, so that wasn't a problem. As I said before, the builder and also the architect, they have to show their up-to-date insurance policies, and they have to have an indemnity, I think, of 6.5 million. So every time I draw down money, I have to show those. And in terms of insuring the building, as the building has been built, that's under the builder's insurance, and I now have taken out my own insurance on the building. It's actually with FBD. They came out and they looked at it and they gave me a quote which was reasonable, and I went with them as opposed to going with a slightly cheaper quote with people I didn't really know who they were.
Yeah. And James, I suppose the same for you. Insurance, you've got doing restaurants, weddings, you've loads of things going on there. Was it hard for you to get insurance, or how did you get around?
Yeah, it is quite difficult actually. We go with a company called Castle Acre. It's even more difficult when you've got a country house because they're more difficult to get insurance with. So we were very restricted. We were with FBD at one point. But yeah, insurances are obviously our biggest bill after labour.
Yeah. So yeah, it needs a bit of money put into it. And another question I suppose it's more focused towards you because you're sourcing outside staff, but how difficult is it to staff a diversification program or project? Like, it's obviously very time demanding on you, but how did you go about outsourcing labor? So you need chefs, waiters, etc.
I suppose, it's probably one of the most difficult elements of a business like this is the staff, especially the chefs. Everybody knows about chefs. They come and they go, and they, it's very, very difficult finding the right people, I suppose. But with time, that becomes easier. I think with experience, you are better at finding the right kind of people, I suppose. As the project has obviously gained exposure and a reputation, we have a lot of people coming to us, which is great. So when we advertise through jobs.ie, which is what we use to find, we get a lot of people applying. And so on, we spend a good bit of time training people, and personality plays a big. It's been difficult, people come and go, and then we have quite a lot of people who've been there since the beginning, which is great because that's what you want. Helping with the farm, who I inherited two chaps from my dad, and then we have some gardeners. So yeah, it's not easy for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
We use right
Another question there that's
no, we use
coming
every
in.
possible means, you know, if we,
Yeah, go ahead. I think your internet's breaking up slightly on us there, James, a little bit.
is that me? Right.
Stephen, I'll
Can you
just
hear me now?
yeah, I can hear you. Stephen, I'll fire this to you first. I'm not sure, you're probably just hitting on this, but you haven't fully got up and running. But how do you pitch your prices for your business? So have you done much research into what other people are charging, or where are you setting yourself in the market with that?
Yeah, well, I did do a trip over to the UK to see a similar business and see kind of how it's run and what they might be charging. Done a little bit of rooting around in Ireland to find out what some businesses are charging. And then when it comes down to the therapy end of things, my wife Heidi, she knows about that because she's been involved in therapy in Nace on a private scale for the last few years, so she knows the rates for rooms that's charged. So yeah, just a little bit of, I suppose you might call it espionage.
Yeah. Undercover work, yeah. And James, you're covering obviously the cost of the product you're providing, as well as the labor that's going into it. So how did you work on pitching your prices or researching that?
Are you talking about for the actual restaurant?
Yeah, or for the wedding venue, or for anything, you know, your events, like you sell tickets on an evening.
Well, we did a few road trips around different countries. Like we went to England and we checked out places like Dalesford Farm and Petersham Nurseries, and we went to kind of I suppose places that we might aspire to be in a par with a little bit. Not quite, obviously, the likes of Dalesford Farm, who have all JCP money behind them. But yeah, that's difficult. That's a really difficult one as well. You know, I have to say, what we're doing is we're growing all the food, so we're planting the seeds. There's a lot more labor going into it. Like most restaurants, as you probably know, they're opening packets. They're not even prepping. They're not peeling. They're not doing anything. There's a huge amount of labor going into what we're doing from the kitchen. So everything is prepped from the very beginning. And of course, all the growing, all the harvesting, the washing. Yeah, it's a lot. So it's been a learning curve. We didn't have it all worked out at the beginning. We just tried to you know, be as smart as possible along the way, and then improvise and change and adjust. And then in terms of our menus, again, that's a difficult one because we're in the countryside, we're not in Dublin, so you obviously can't charge quite as much. There aren't very many restaurants in Ireland that are trying to do what we're doing, so a lot of people wouldn't have understood everything that goes into producing what we're putting on your plate, you know. So, but I think a lot of people do understand it now. People appreciate it now. We try and get the message out through our social media, on our menus and our website, etc., about the freshness of what we're doing and what's involved, which is obviously going to cost a little bit more. So some people might go and say, "Oh, you're expensive," but in fact, we're not really for what we're doing. We should be charging perhaps a little bit more. So it's a difficult one, you know, because you can't put people off.
Yeah. But no, it's just a bit of research needed. And the final question I think we'll take today is just, Helen, when is the next leader funding program open? And we got one question there as well. Do you have to be a farmer to apply?
First question, we were expecting an announcement yesterday and didn't come. So we're going to hold on now and hope for the new year. So what we expect is that they'll give us short extension on the current program in case anyone wants to finalize a few grants. And a transition program will be announced then. So I suppose in many areas it's business as usual. Start with your expression of interest and start engaging with your local leader company so that they know you want to put together an application. What I've been saying to people is, if you have an application in for planning permission, let us know the reference number so we can check with you on the date you do your decision. If you want to, you know, start researching the market and your suppliers, we're kind of working with people on things that they have to do anyway to develop their business, even if it's not specifically for leader. So we can have a little bit of work underway before, you know, while we're waiting for an announcement, rather than just stopping and doing nothing. We're saying, well, what can we do now to be prepared if an announcement came in the morning? So that's the approach we're taking. I'd say many are the same. So I don't have an answer. It doesn't mean do nothing. It just means, you know, start doing that preparation, start researching suppliers, and really just putting together your business plan. You're going to need those things anyway, whether you go for grant-aided leader or somewhere else, or whether you do it through your other funds. So that's the first thing I would say. Remind me what the second question was.
Just, do you have to be a farmer to apply for a grant with Leader? So if there's
No,
not all
you
farm
don't.
diversification projects, you cover all business startups, isn't it?
Not all business startups. Farm diversification is one subheading. Tourism, social enterprise, and the creative industry are the others.
Okay.
So
So-
mainstream businesses like your local spar shop and things like that wouldn't be covered under Leader. Hairdressing and beauticians, any kind of mainstream business is not. It's really, I suppose, the creative industry, like craft and things like that, tourism, social enterprise, and farm diversification would be the main headings. If you're unsure, just check with your local Leader company and they'll tell you.
Perfect, that's great. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time today. So before I end, I would just like to thank the three panelists for their time and openness. So thanks to Stephen, James, and Helen for coming on. Thanks to Barry Casson for coming to help with the IT at the background, because I'm not great at that. And just to let you know that the final Farm Business webinar for 2020 will take place at the same time, so 11 o'clock next Tuesday, where Anya O'Riordan from West Cork is going to be joined by Alan and Valerie Kingston of the Glenillan Dairy Farm, David and Elizabeth Ross of Top of the Rock Pod Park and Walking Centre, and Johnny Lynch of Macroom Buffalo Cheese. So all that's left for me to say is thank you all for coming on and listening, and I hope you all have a happy and healthy Christmas. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.